So, this work comes out of the Welsh Memorials project, which I'm running at Swansea University, funded by the Living Legacies Engagement Centre. The Living Legacies Engagement Centre, based in Queen's University, Belfast, one of the 5 World War I engagement centres around Britain. And I'm going to go towards well, an analysis of numerous memorials which include Canadians, which memorialise Canadians, or Canadian soldiers and Australian soldiers in Welsh locations. But I'm going to start off, my starting point is thinking about recruitment, and thinking about particularly, well, obviously recruitment before conscription came into Britain in 1916. And of course, right from the start of the war, there was a very strong movement to persuade young men to volunteer. And this was a multifaceted operation. There's not a single campaign, and it's certainly not organised from the top down, and it's not directed from the centre. It happens almost spontaneously at many different levels all across the nations of Britain. So pressure was brought to bear upon young men eligible for military service from a range of different agencies through a variety of channels. And one core aspect of this recruiting discourse is the use of rivalry, and rivalry at a number of different levels. So at the national level, in late 1914, there was an attempt to shame the men of Wales into volunteering by using statistics which showed that the recruiting rate in Scotland and England was much higher than Wales, and Ireland was catching up. So, and there are plenty of other examples of the recruiting rate of counties being highlighted, or the recruiting rate in towns. Again, with the purpose of shaming those men from areas with lower recruiting rates to do their bit. Lower recruiting rate equals lack of courage, or lack of patriotism, or lack of honour, valour, the words of 1914. And this element of rivalry also worked at a local level, with the recruiting rates of workplaces being compared with a number of volunteers provided by chapels or clubs. And usually, when a county or town or organisation was shamed by being named as a poor supplier of recruits, the impulse was to count as many volunteers as possible and publicise those figures as evidence that your county or your town or your workplace or your chapel was doing its bit for king and country. And so here's one example of this. From early 1915, the town of Carnarvon, northwest Wales, had been mocked publicly in some newspapers by other towns for its poor recruiting record. They said there's only 50 recruits drawing from Carnarvon, a town of 9,200 people. And so what's Carnarvon's response? They go and count how many recruits they've actually provided. The town's leaders go and, to save Carnarvon's honour. And they come up with a figure of 570 men from Carnarvon. And the point here for me today is 5 of them are Canadians. So they counted as local men, which is of course perfectly understandable, as most of them, would have had parents still in Carnarvon or other close relatives, so they're still part of a community there in Carnarvon. So this is just one example where you basically count as many men as you can, and you include Canadians, Australians as part of a total. Here's one example. The Barmouth newspaper published a roll of honour many weeks in 1915, listing all the Barmouth boys serving their king and country on land and sea. This is a list of 172 names. 172 names, and 8 of them are with the Imperial Forces. So it's 5 Canadians and 3 Australians. Arthur Wilson Roberts, I'll come back to him. Arthur Wilson Roberts is one of the Australians. So that's actually 5%, just under 5% of the names on this public list of Barmouth men are actually serving with Canadian or Australian forces. And there are many similar examples in the Welsh newspapers of local Canadians or Australians being singled out for attention and praise. but he literally got the bunting out in Gethin, west of Swansea, September 1915, to welcome home Corporal Harry Rees to welcome to his former home then, to his parents' place. And yeah, bunting flying, welcome. There's also a photograph of him in the paper. He'd emigrated to Canada 2 years previously, but enlisted straight away at the start of the war. And you know, these things are really quite common. Here's an example of some Australians who are paraded through the streets of Ogmore Vale in Mid Glamorgan. So 2 Australians, and yeah, led by the local Boy Scouts, there was a procession that marched through the principal street, so a public display to honour these local Australians and to, well, you know, obviously there's an element of local pride here, that our boys doing their bit for king and country. So on one level, this sort of thing could be expected because of a large number of emigrants from Wales, Scotland, England and Ireland who served in the forces of Canada, Australia and the other countries of the British Empire. So obviously partly this is a function of the fact that there was substantial emigration from the countries of Britain to the Empire in the years leading up to the First World War. But also, if you think about who's emigrating, a lot of them are young, single men with a sense of adventure. And you know, who is the most likely kind of person to join up in the first years of the war? A young, single man with a sense of adventure. So, yeah, that's one of the reasons why there's such a high rate of enlistment of these men. So the statistics I have, I hope Hannah will nod when I say these, approximately a fifth of Canada's population in 1914 were immigrants from the United Kingdom, so a fifth of the population from the UK. Over the 4+ years of the war, almost half of the Canadian servicemen were born in England, Scotland, Wales or Ireland. The proportion is somewhat lower for Australia, but still over 1 in 5 of the Australian volunteers of 1914 were British and Irish born. So one aspect of this story which obviously shines through is it's taking place at the high noon of the British Empire. This is obviously the imperial age. And there are many examples of families with sons serving in different imperial forces. One example here, Private James Rowland, originally from Aberystwyth, and when he was killed serving with the Australian forces in 1917, the report says one brother was serving with the New Zealanders, another was serving in German East Africa, and oh, by the way, one of his sisters lives in Canada. So yeah, within one family we have an international and imperial network. And no, okay, perhaps this is slightly uncommon to have quite that, quite so explicit, but there are many examples where you have a couple of sons in different countries' forces. So, within this context, it's worth mentioning a very talented young man, Arthur Wilson Roberts. He emigrated from Wales to Canada in 1906, where, among other exploits, he set up a Welsh society on Vancouver Island before he moved across the Pacific to Australia and landed in Australia just before the war started. So he joined the Australian forces, and he served and was wounded in Gallipoli. And some of the letters that he sent to his friends in Wales were published in the local newspapers, such as this one from Egypt, in which he says he's teaching a Scottish friend how to sing in Welsh. Brilliant, isn't it? He was actually killed on the Western Front in August 1916, and he received a 3.5-page obituary in Wales' national magazine, Cymru. Yes. I think this is well worth quoting. This comes from the mainly in the Welsh language, but this quotation, one of his quotations is in English. The next time you are asked to go to war by a statesman, arrange to take him along with you, which I think is rather nice. But then numerous letters and reports of his letters he wrote and reports of his activities in the Welsh newspapers, photographed there as well. So Arthur Wilson Roberts is commemorated on the War Memorial at Barmouth, the town where he grew up, and there are another 3 Canadians in total, and 3 Australians, so 6 of the 56 names on this memorial are, well, Dominion forces. So obviously over 10% of the local men from Barmouth who died served in the Dominion armies. He's also named on the memorial at Gethin in Carnarvonshire, northwest Wales, where his parents resided. 13 names, I don't know, it's only the name, initials and the place of residence, so I don't actually know whether any of the other 12 were Dominions in Dominion soldiers in this case. But this is quite typical. The large town memorials, village memorials in Wales have quite a high proportion of Canadians and Australians listed on them. This is the one in Bangor Cathedral. Yeah, 198 names, 3 Australians, 2 Canadians, 1 South African. Usually, Canadians at the top of the list, then Australians, and South Africans and New Zealanders quite a lot rarer. As well as town or city or village memorials, there are other kinds of memorials. Memorials to war dead from a school, for example. Cardiff High School, 77 names, and 5 of them are Canadians. And yeah, no one's done a systematic study of these so far. One of the things I'm doing at the moment is trying to gather the data so it's possible to look at these and see, what are the patterns? And I'm particularly interested in the informal memorials, not the village green memorials, but those created by institutions for themselves, such as school memorials and, in particular, chapel memorials. There were 4,000 plus chapels operating in Wales in 1914, so there's an awful lot of memorials to be studied and information gathered. But obviously the chapel memorials, these were created by the congregations themselves. No one told them they had to do it, no one told them how to do it. So these basically reflect, how they thought of the war. So one of the things you can do is analyse iconography. Angels, for example, are very common. And the language is very, this is the role of honour, Hych and Rydedd. Words such as honour are very prevalent in these memorials. Also prevalent in these memorials, Canadians. And that's basically what I'll be looking at now for the rest of this paper. How many Canadians and Australians you can find if you look, if you gather this information together. Here's one example, a chapel in Merthyr, and so some of these memorials very helpfully tell you the regiment, so it's a fairly easy job to find the Australians and Canadians. So here we go, T.N. Davis, Australian Imperial Forces. Other ones don't, and here it's a lot more detective work. Here, just a list of names and so many ones. You see the Williamses, Thomases, Joneses, Evanses. It's a very difficult job to actually find out who these men are unless you find the local war memorial in the village and you can match them up. And in this case, one of these names, William James Williams, served the Australian forces, died 1 month before the end of the war. So, what the Welsh Memorials Project is doing is, as we're gathering this information and trying to create a database, so far we've processed information on 163 chapel memorials, and many of these are just lists of names, and there's no way of knowing, who the men are, whether or not there are any Canadians or Australians there. Many of them also only list those who died, so obviously that's a smaller selection of names, and again, not necessarily listing everyone from the chapel who went. But these are statistics. So on 27 different chapel memorials, I found 31 Canadians, 12 Australians on 12 chapel memorials, and then smaller numbers of South Africans, New Zealanders, only one USA, and one who served in the East African forces. So, one thing which I will do, once we have a greater level of detail here, is to map it out and see, and hopefully we'll be able to see the different patterns of emigration being reflected here, i.e. certain parts of Wales had an emigration tradition to Australia, other parts had a stronger emigration tradition to Canada, and you'll be able to see that reflected in clusters of Australians and Canadians, clusters on the map. Here's one where we have one Australian who died and two Canadians who served and survived on a very ornate memorial. This is towards the upper end of a design spectrum in terms of chapel memorials. You have all these fantastic imagery here, including pictures of a dreadnought there, picture of a chapel there with the Union flag and the French flag either side. But yeah, listing two Canadians and one Australian. And then, when you find the list of only those who died, such as this example, Capel Graig in Machynlleth, and again, I mean, piggybacking here upon the work of the Local History Society, who've done work on the local war memorial, and so that's told me that Richard Henry Thomas there, killed in action, 8th of September 1916, name on the Vimy Memorial, and one who was, he was in Machynlleth in 1911, but obviously emigrated soon afterwards to Canada before returning back across the Atlantic. This one's interesting because, 9 dead from a chapel, 2 of them Canadians. So Corwen was in Meirionnydd, so North Wales, sort of inland North Wales. And 2 Canadians, and the local newspaper has reports of their deaths. And here we go. Private Owen Vaughan-Jones was killed in action during the Battle of Vimy Ridge. Although the date is slightly later, obviously not on the main act, unless he was wounded and died a couple of weeks later. But obviously, killed in that campaign. And one who died a few months later, Thomas Ogwen Davis, one of his friends, who fought, he fought side by side with Private Vaughan-Jones at the Battle of Vimy Ridge. So this is unusual, if you like, but 2/9 of a name on this chapel memorial are actually Canadian dead. Unusual, but then there are clusters of Canadians, Canadians and Australians on these memorials. Here are 2 examples from Barry. David Hammond Johnson, who died with Canadian artillery in late 1916, and actually, one thing to note here is how fortunate we are in Wales that the newspapers have been digitised to such a great standard by the National Library of Wales. It's absolutely revolutionised how easy it is to find information. So here we have the example of the Barry Dock News giving an obituary notice on Sergeant Major David Hammond Johnston, formerly a coal trimmer at Barry. And another chapel just down the road, David William Davis, again killed in 1916, and so an obituary in his local newspaper back home in Wales, and his name is memorialised on his local chapel back home in Wales. So this is, if you like, the take-home message here, that Canadians and Australians were part of I call it the national picture of Welsh contribution. So it's not just a British picture of here, it's the Welsh contribution. These are celebrated as Welshmen and Canadians, Welshmen and Australians. And so they're counted as part of the Welsh contribution to the war effort. The papers celebrate them. They are given prominence in a whole series of reports. The numbers of Canadian soldiers in particular really makes me wonder about this whole question of how many Welsh died in the First World War, which is such a thorny topic. But how many of these Welsh Canadians are actually included on the list of Welsh war dead? And the fact that their home communities remember them and honour them, and they're commemorated just as much as other local soldiers who died. And of course, particularly now that we can have access to these obituaries in the local newspapers, it really brings home the impact of the war upon communities, upon families, the local, as well as the big picture here, the local picture, the impact of the war upon individual families. And one slide to finish is this is an unusual one. It's a memorial in a Welsh chapel graveyard to a soldier whose body is somewhere on Vimy Ridge. He died the 12th of April at Vimy Ridge, but his family have this gravestone, this grave marker to him in their home chapel. It's at Llan Steffan in Carmarthenshire. Thank you.